January 11, 1944, over central Germany. Luftwaffe fighters climbed to intercept an American bomber formation heading toward targets in Brunswick and Oschersleben. Standard mission. The German pilots had done this dozens of times before. Bf-109s and Fw-190s formed up at altitude. The plan was simple. Wait for the American escort fighters to reach their range limit and turn back, then attack the bombers when they were undefended. American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings escorted bombers from England to the German border, but their range was limited. Once they hit their fuel limit, they turned back. That's when German fighters pounced on the exposed bombers. This had been working for months. The Luftwaffe had been inflicting heavy losses on American bomber formations. October 1943 had been particularly devastating. The raid on Schweinfurt caused 60 bombers shot down in a single day. But today, something was different. The P-47s turned back as expected. The German pilots moved in, preparing to attack the B-17 formations. Then they saw aircraft they didn't recognize. Sleek, single-engine fighters with a distinctive profile. They had long noses, bubble canopies, and laminar flow wings. They weren't P-47s. Those were stocky, heavy aircraft. They weren't P-38s. Those had twin booms and twin engines. These were P-51 Mustangs, and they weren't turning back. The P-51's range was something German pilots couldn't comprehend. Drop tanks gave them enough fuel to escort bombers deep into Germany and still have fuel for combat. For the first time, American bombers had escort fighters that could stay with them all the way to the target and back. German pilots didn't know this yet. They engaged, expecting these new American fighters to behave like the others, fight for a few minutes, then break off to return to England. The P-51s didn't break off. They stayed, and they were fast. The P-51B Mustang had a top speed of 440 miles per hour at altitude. It could outrun both the Bf-109G and Fw-190A in level flight above 20,000 feet. More importantly, it could sustain high speeds. The Merlin engine didn't overheat or lose power during extended combat. When German fighters tried their standard tactic, dive away from combat to escape, the P-51s followed and caught them. One German pilot, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke of JG-11, described the first encounter in his diary. "We went after the bombers as usual. Then these new American fighters appeared. They stayed with us through every maneuver. When we tried to disengage, they followed us down. I've never seen anything like them." The debut that shocked the Luftwaffe. The January 11th mission was the P-51's debut as a long-range bomber escort. The 354th Fighter Group, flying P-51Bs, escorted the 8th Air Force's raid on Oschersleben and Brunswick. The results shocked the Luftwaffe. German fighters that engaged the P-51s found themselves outmatched. The Mustang was faster at altitude, had better acceleration in dives, and could turn with Bf-109s. The only advantage German fighters retained was roll rate. The Fw-190 could still outroll the P-51 in quick maneuvers. But tactical advantages don't matter when you can't escape. German pilots discovered this when they broke off combat. The P-51s stayed with them. There was no safe disengagement anymore. This changed everything. For 2 years, the Luftwaffe had controlled when and where to fight. They chose favorable moments to attack, when escort fighters were absent or turning back due to fuel limits. If the fight turned against them, they disengaged, dove away, and escaped. The P-51 eliminated that option. Now, American fighters could pursue German fighters all the way back to their airfields if necessary. Luftwaffe pilots couldn't just survive combat. They had to win it, or risk being chased down and destroyed. The psychological impact was immediate. German pilots had been told they were flying superior aircraft, flown by superior pilots. Luftwaffe propaganda emphasized German technical and tactical advantages. The arrival of the P-51 shattered that illusion. For the first time, German pilots faced an American fighter that was objectively better in nearly every measurable category. Faster, longer range, better high-altitude performance, and there were more of them coming. After January 11, 1944, the P-51 Mustang began replacing P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings as the primary long-range escort fighter. By March 1944, most American fighter groups in England were transitioning to P-51s. The impact on the air war was immediate and devastating for the Luftwaffe. Before P-51s, American bomber losses averaged 5 to 10% per mission on deep penetration raids into Germany. These losses were unsustainable. At a 10% loss rate, a bomber crew's statistical survival chance over 25 missions was nearly zero. With P-51 escort all the way to the target and back, bomber losses dropped to 2 to 4% per mission on average. Still significant, but sustainable. Crews had realistic chances of completing their 25 mission tours. German fighter losses, meanwhile, increased dramatically. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 280 fighters on the Western Front. In February, losses jumped to over 350. By March, monthly losses exceeded 450 fighters. The Luftwaffe couldn't sustain this. German aircraft production was actually increasing in early 1944. Factories were producing more fighters than ever before, but pilot training couldn't keep pace. Experienced pilots were being killed faster than replacements could be trained. New German pilots in 1944 received approximately 160 hours of flight training before being sent to combat units. Compare this to 1922, when new pilots received 250 to 300 hours. American pilots in 1944 were receiving 400-plus hours of training before combat deployment. The P-51 exploited this experience gap ruthlessly. In dogfights between experienced German pilots in a Bf-109, the P-51's advantages were significant but not overwhelming. A skilled German pilot in a Bf-109 could still fight effectively against the P-51, but when inexperienced German pilots faced veteran American P-51 pilots, the results were one-sided slaughter. New Luftwaffe pilots were being sent into combat with minimal training, facing American pilots with hundreds of hours of flight time and combat experience. The mathematics were brutal. Germany was losing its most experienced pilots. Replacements arrived undertrained, they died quickly. The cycle repeated. Each month, the average skill level of Luftwaffe fighter pilots declined. Each month, the average skill level of American fighter pilots increased. The P-51 also changed American fighter tactics. Before long-range escort capability, American fighters flew defensively, staying close to bombers, reacting to German attacks. The P-51's range allowed offensive tactics. American fighter groups began flying fighter sweeps, leaving the bomber formations to hunt German fighters aggressively. P-51s would range ahead of bombers, searching for German fighters climbing to intercept. Instead of waiting for Germans to attack bombers, P-51s attacked German fighters before they could reach the bombers. This forced German fighters to fight on American terms. Luftwaffe fighters climbing toward bombers now had to watch for P-51s above them. The hunters had become the hunted. German responses were inadequate. The Luftwaffe tried concentrating fighters for mass attacks, overwhelming escorts through sheer numbers. But this required assembling large formations, which took time and gave P-51s opportunities to attack during formation assembly. The Luftwaffe also tried standing patrols, fighters stationed along likely bomber routes, but P-51s could chase these patrols away or destroy them. German fighters couldn't hold positions when American fighters had fuel to pursue indefinitely. Germany's technical response was the Me-262 jet fighter, which entered limited service in late 1944. The Me-262 could outrun P-51s and had devastating firepower. But production problems, fuel shortages, and Hitler's interference meant only about 200 Me-262s saw combat. Too few, too late. The strategic impact of the P-51 extended beyond combat losses. German fighters that survived encounters with P-51s were learning to avoid combat. Experienced pilots developed survival tactics, refuse engagement unless conditions were overwhelmingly favorable, break off at first sign of P-51s, prioritize survival over shooting down bombers. This was rational self-preservation. but it meant the Luftwaffe was effectively ceding control of German airspace. Bombers flew through with minimal interference. German cities were bombed with increasing impunity. By spring 1944, American bombers could strike any target in Germany with manageable losses. The Luftwaffe was still fighting. Losses were still being inflicted, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. In 1943, the 8th Air Force lost approximately 1,850 heavy bombers over Europe. In 1944, despite flying far more missions deeper into Germany, losses were approximately 2,100 bombers, only slightly higher despite dramatically increased operational tempo. German fighter losses in 1943 on the Western Front were approximately 2,400 aircraft. In 1944, losses exceeded 6,000 aircraft. The Luftwaffe was being destroyed through attrition it couldn't replace. Individual German pilots who encountered P-51s on January 11, 1944, described it as the moment they realized the air war was lost. Not lost that day, lost eventually. The Americans had solved the range problem. They had a fighter that could go anywhere and outfight German aircraft. Heinz Knoke, who survived the war, wrote in his memoirs, "When we saw the Mustangs staying with the bombers all the way to the target, we knew it was over. We would keep fighting, but we knew the Americans could reach anywhere now, and we couldn't stop them." Another German pilot, Johannes Steinhoff, later said, "The P-51 was the weapon that broke the Luftwaffe's back, not because it was so superior, though it was excellent, but because it meant we had to fight over Germany, over our own cities every day with no rest. That wore us down more than anything." The psychological breaking point on German pilots was devastating. Before the P-51, Luftwaffe pilots could disengage when outnumbered or outmatched. They could escape, regroup, and fight another day. The P-51 removed that safety valve. Every engagement became potentially fatal. German pilots couldn't choose their battles anymore. They had to fight whenever and wherever American fighters found them, and American fighters could find them anywhere. The stress was unbearable. Luftwaffe pilots were flying multiple sorties per day, facing overwhelming odds, with no guarantee of escape even if they survived the initial engagement. Morale collapsed. By mid-1944, experienced German pilots were requesting transfers to other fronts, anywhere but the Western Front where P-51s ruled the skies. New pilots arrived terrified, having heard stories from survivors about the unstoppable American Mustangs. Some refused to engage when they spotted P-51s. Others panicked and made fatal mistakes. The Luftwaffe was breaking psychologically before it broke materially. January 11, 1944. German pilots climbed to intercept American bombers, expecting the usual pattern. American escorts would turn back and German fighters would attack the undefended bombers. Instead, they encountered a new American fighter that didn't turn back, that stayed with the bombers all the way to target, that could chase German fighters down when they tried to escape. The P-51 Mustang. Range of 1,650 miles with drop tanks, speed of 440 miles per hour at altitude, maneuverability matching or exceeding German fighters, and enough of them that every bomber formation would have escort all the way to Berlin and back. German pilots saw the P-51 on January 11th and knew immediately what it meant. The Americans had solved the critical problem of bomber escort range. German advantages, tactical control, engagement timing, the ability to disengage, were gone. The air war wasn't over. The Luftwaffe would keep fighting for another 16 months, but the outcome was decided that day over central Germany, when German pilots first tried to escape from P-51s and discovered they couldn't. The P-51 Mustang, the weapon that changed the air war. Not through revolutionary technology, the P-51 was a brilliant but conventional design, but through the simple fact that it could go anywhere and stay there, and that was enough to break the Luftwaffe. January 11, 1944, the day German pilots looked up and saw their future, and knew they had lost.